Chapter 3, physical development. We are not going to spend very much time on physical development after this chapter. So in every stage of the lifespan in this textbook, and in most courses that take a lifespan approach to development, they talk about physical development and then talk about cognitive and socio-emotional development. We're not going to talk about physical development a lot after this until we get to the aging chapters, where that again becomes front and center and a really important aspect of development. It's important all across the lifespan, but we have to make some choices in a 16-week class. And so if we spend a lot of time on physical development, that comes at the expense of cognitive and socio-emotional, and I think those are also important. So in this chapter, some terminologies, cephalocaudal and proximodistal. I try not to throw in a lot of jargon that I don't think you'll ever use. And it isn't so much that I want you to know those words, although I do. I really want you to know the concept that development proceeds early in life from the top down. So even prenatally, you saw some of the images in the book of how the neural tube formed and then went down and became the spinal cord, and everything sort of started at the top and developed down. That's the cephalocaudal principle of development, that things get more complex and more developed in a top-down fashion. Postnatally, what you see is that children gain motor control of their head and their mouth before they can get control of the trunk of their body and turn in a way that they want to, or walk. So there's that top-down. Neurons are being covered in myelin. Movement is getting more coordinated, and all of that is happening in a cephalocaudal fashion. Proximodistal is from the inside out, from the proximal to the distal, and what that says is, as you saw, prenatally, you saw the development of, from top down and then inside out. You saw arms start to develop, and then after arms, hands and feet and those kinds of things. So there's that inside out development as well. Postnatally, gross motor skills before fine motor skills, those kinds of things. So those are really interesting principles of development. And if you're interested in physical development later on in your career or in your academics, those will be important concepts for you to know. With respect to the brain, there's a brief review of neurons and how neurons transmit information in the brain. If it's been a while since you took general psychology, that's a good thing to focus on. Keep in mind that we have about 100 billion neurons when we're born, and myelin is being added on to all of those neurons so that the transmission is more efficient, is quicker. But there's also there are a lot of connections that we're not going to need later on. We call it transient exuberance, where there's just a lot of connections between neurons. And then it isn't exactly use it or lose it, but it's that kind of a principle at some point in development in early childhood and later in life as well. Things that aren't being used are being pruned out so that the machine, so to speak, can be more efficient. So just keep that in mind when you're reading those things. There's a couple of concepts that are not in this textbook, but were in the previous edition that I wanted to point out because I think they're interesting. Experience expectant and experience dependent. There are certain aspects of development, especially physical development, cognitive and other ways as well, that you have to have the experience in order for that thing to happen, and that is experience dependent. Experience expectant would be in any typical environment, you would find these things and everybody would develop the thing. So when you think about learning to walk or learning to talk in your first language, those are experience expectant. Anybody in a typically developing, non-deprived environment is going to be afforded the opportunity to learn to walk, and they will learn to walk. They don't need to be taught to walk. The same thing with language. You don't have to teach children to speak. Now, you might need to correct them and teach them to speak using, more and more complex rules of grammar. But initially, they want to speak, they are spoken to, and they try to speak. So that is also what we would consider experience expectant. It's going to develop in almost all people in that way. There's some motor milestones in this chapter. Keep in mind, we sort of pay some attention to those, especially if you haven't been around children for a while. If you found a child in the mall or found a child on the side of the road, hopefully you won't do either of those things because hopefully they won't be lost. But if you did and you called 911 and they said, how old do you think the child was? If you haven't been around children at all, you're going to have no idea. It's like, I don't know, it's a child. You tell me. So after you've studied this chapter and you see what some of the motor milestones are, you should be able to make an educated guess. So I would encourage you, if you're, at the library, at the grocery store, picking up food, if there are children around you, watch what they're doing and see if you can determine how old you think they are. Without being creepy and staring at them for too long, like no binoculars or anything. But look at them and see if you can determine how old they are. Are they walking, and do they seem like they're a good walker, or they've just learned to walk? Because if they've just learned to walk, they might be around 12 months old. If they're not walking at all, are they sitting up? If they are sitting up, then they might be older than 6 months, but less than 12. If they're not sitting up yet, then maybe less than 6 months. So check out those motor milestones and sort of see if you can make some estimates of the people that you see in your life. Dynamic systems theory. So Esther Thalin, there's a video this week that talks a little bit about dynamic systems, but Esther Thalin's theory was that things don't just happen due to maturation, that it is both physical maturation and also aspects of the environment working in tandem. So there's this interactive effect, and so that's what makes that system dynamic. So hopefully you'll find that interesting. The book talks about reflexes, and there are some videos on reflexes for you to see children demonstrating these. Some of them are exactly what they sound like. The swallowing reflex, the eye blink reflex, startle. The startle is the Moro reflex, so it's named after the person that discovered it. And the Babinski reflex, which I'm not sure is named in your textbook, is the one that's in the video where they if you draw your finger across the bottom of an infant's foot, their toes will fan out. So that would be the Babinski reflex. So check out those reflexes. Some reflexes are present early in life and then they go away and they never come back. Some of them, however, are lifelong. When you think about eye blink, if somebody puts a puff of air in your eye to do an eye test, you're going to blink. And so those are lifelong. The gag reflex, the swallowing reflex, those are lifelong reflexes. But some of them tend to go away early in life. So that's what we'll be studying. When you think about the sucking reflex, think about the portion of the textbook that talks about breastfeeding and the sort of the benefits of breastfeeding, and the encouragement that in certain countries and certain just different eras in the United States as well, of encouraging breastfeeding or not encouraging breastfeeding. One common difficulty with breastfeeding is somebody will say, I tried breastfeeding and it didn't work for me. And I think it's important for people to keep in mind when you think about these motor developments and you think about reflexes, that when babies are first born, they're not really very good at sucking. They have a sucking reflex, but it's not strong. And so it takes a period of weeks for the baby to get good at sucking. And until then, it's a struggle for them and for the mother to try and get through each feeding before the child falls asleep, before they're exhausted, before they just run out of steam. So just keep that in mind as well. Now on to the section of the chapter that has to do with cognitive development. This will be, for those of you, again, who have had Psych 150 or general psychology recently, Piaget is front and center in this chapter. I'm talking about the first stage of cognitive development, the sensory motor stage. And at this stage, really the only thing that infants can do to explore the world is to use their hands and initially to use their mouth. They'll put everything in their mouth. It's all they've got, right? They don't have language. They don't have mobility. They can't do a lot. So anything that's around them, they will suck on and try and explore that way. Piaget was really interested. He called infants and children little scientists. And he was really interested in the mistakes they made. But they aren't really mistakes. They look like a mistake if an adult did them. But since children are doing them, it's interesting to think about how they're thinking and how their thinking is different than adult thinking because of the kinds of things that they're doing. Excuse me. Initially what the child in the sensory motor stage can do, they can cry, and crying will bring somebody closer. They can point when they get to that age or that stage, and then perhaps the person will name the thing that they're pointing at. And once they get language, they can say the wrong name for something to elicit the correct name. Once they learn the word dog, if they say everything that's got fur and 4 legs is a dog, and they point to it and say dog, and you say, no, that's a cat, now they've got another word, right? So part of how they learn language is by making these mistakes and then being corrected and listening to what the correction is, because they don't yet have the wherewithal to say, that looks like an animal, but it's not a dog. Can you tell me what that is? They don't have all of that yet. So they're learning and learning and learning, and it's a very interesting stage. They're also developing schemas for how the world works. A schema is a sort of a mental, your best mental internal model of how things work. And they're using the process of assimilation and accommodation to either revise those schemas or develop new schemas. So assimilation is when you pull more detail into an existing schema. So if you think of a birthday party schema, if you've ever been to a birthday party, you have an idea of things that happen at birthday parties. And as you went to more and more birthday parties, if you did as you were growing up, you learned more and more about the different kinds of things that might happen at a birthday party. Your schema got more dense, more developed. So that's a process of assimilation. So if I invited you to a birthday party next Sunday at 4, you would have some idea of what it was that I was asking you. Now, you might want to know what the age range was for people who are coming, because you might have a schema for an adult birthday party that's different from one for a child's birthday party. However, even for a child's birthday party, if you came and knocked on the door of the birthday party host and they said, come on in, we've got cake and clowns and balloons and games, that's all what you would expect. And if they had one kind of a game that you'd never encountered before, you would assimilate that into your birthday party schema. However, if they said, you know what, we just had a whole bunch of rocks delivered, everybody grab a wheelchair, everybody grab a baseball cap, we're going to do some really hard work for 2 or 3 hours, and then we're going to have the fun. And you might say to yourself, well, that's not a birthday party. Like, I don't have any place in my schema for things that aren't fun at a birthday party. Not that you enjoy every single one of them, but at least intended to be fun. And so in that sense, you might have to accommodate and say, oh, I need a different schema for birthday parties that aren't fun, or I need to really change how I think about birthday parties and ask myself, is this going to be the fun kind or the not fun kind? So there's a blurry line between assimilation and accommodation. When are you adding to it, and when are you adding something that's so different that it really changes it? And as you move forward, I think you'll see lots of examples, and sometimes it'll be really clear and sometimes less clear. Definitely, if I'm asking you a question, I'll try and make it very clear that it's all the way on one side or all the way on the other, and not that blurry line in the middle. Okay, so those are those internal schemas, or those internal working models. One of the criticisms of Piaget, and it's not a criticism that is so drastic that you would say we don't use this theory anymore, but Piaget was working and developing a theory, and he had estimates for when children would do things. And he, ever since then, everybody's been saying, well, I think they could do it earlier. If somebody tells you that, that your child is going to walk at 12 months, it's like, well, I think they could do it at 11 months. Piaget called that sort of the American question: how early? How much better can we do these things? So René Baillargeon is one of the researchers who's done work on object permanence, for example. And what they've done is test children using different methods. And what they've found is that Piaget underestimated what children could do, or the age at which they could do it. So children as young as 3 months old can understand that things continue to exist when hidden. And Piaget thought that it was much later than that. So, not years later, but months later. So, as you're reading that, sort of think about what it is they're testing. When you're looking at the videos, look at how the children are reacting to things. And we'll talk more about, the difference between sensory motor and pre-operational in the next set of chapters when we get to cognitive development. So we're going to be talking about Piaget at every cognitive chapter between now and the end of adolescence. So you'll get plenty of Piaget experience. So language development is really interesting. There's information about both phonemes and I don't know if they talk about morphemes. I'm still working my way back and forth between the book that was more comprehensive and this book that is a little bit more streamlined. I know that I know for sure they talk about morphemes and morphology. So phonology is what it sounds like. Actually, what I know is that it talks about phonology and not morphology. Phonemes are what things sound like. So very early in life, children have to be exposed to the phonemes, the sounds that occur in the language that is going to be their native language. And if they don't hear those, then they would lose the ability to distinguish those sounds later on. As adults, we can learn a foreign language, but if that foreign language includes sounds that don't exist in our native language, we can't really tell the difference. We say it the way we think that a native speaker is saying it, and it doesn't. And then we're corrected. And I was like, but that's what it sounded like to me, and I thought that's what I said. You need to have experience with those sounds of your language early in life, and if not, you're not able to distinguish them later in life. So that's phonemes or phonology. Those are the units of sound of a language. Morphemes are the unit of meaning of a language. So you can count the morphemes in a sentence or in a child's language, or their use of language, to determine the complexity of the way that they're speaking and see whether they are sort of on track with most children of the same age. When you think about morphemes, morphemes are units of meaning. So the word stop has one unit of meaning. It's stop. Stopping, though, has two units of meaning. Stop plus ing, you're in the process of stop. So as you look at a whole sentence, you can do sentence diagramming. If you're interested in narrative analysis and the complexity of children's language, if you say, the cat is going to the yard or going outside, the cat is go, and then ing, because they're in the process of doing it, outside. So that would be 6 morphemes. So probably more information than you needed, but I think it's interesting when you start to analyze children's narratives and children's language to see how it's developing. Language, holophrases and telegraphic speech. So your book talks about telegraphic speech, but they skip over holophrases. When children are first learning language, they just have one word. And so they might say go, meaning I want to go with you, or up, meaning please pick me up. We call that a holophrase because it's one word that conveys an entire sentence worth of meaning. Telegraphic speech are 2-word sentences. So they leave out everything that's extraneous and they say go park, meaning I would like to go to the park or I want to go to the park. That's telegraphic speech. When you think of back in the olden days, even older than me, telegrams paid by the word. If you were text messaging somebody and you had to pay by the word, you might leave out the and the and a bunch of things and really condense it. So that's telegraphic speech and then after that they start to develop full sentences and lots more vocabulary and lots of things. So very interesting. It's an interesting chapter, and we're going to be continuing to talk about language and cognitive development in the next stage. After we do, in chapter 4, we'll do socio-emotional development in infancy, and then we'll move to cognitive development in early childhood, and that'll be really interesting. So have a great week. Contact me if there's anything I can do, or if you need an extra explanation on anything, just let me know. Thanks. Bye.